so sorry.
No problem.
So we're taking this again. In three, two, one. From the good doctor, action.
Hello, I'm Dr. David Ajibadia, and I'm the founder and director of Brain and Body Foundation. Our goal is to empower people everywhere with the knowledge they need to take better control of their health. And a lot of our focus, as if you've been following our series, has been on the black person and the Nigerian because I think we need a little bit more help, in my opinion. So, this series of talks, this one we're about to start, is going to be focused on sickle cell disease. And it's going to be entitled Breaking the Cycle of Pain. And if you've met a child with sickle cell disease, you know that it's a very, very painful and distressing experience for both them and for their parents and their family as well. So, and I think it's very, very important that we take a close look at this. Now, where Nigeria is concerned, we have over 2 million sufferers of sickle cell disease. That's ridiculous. And for the most part, the same treatment, from what I've seen, the same way we've been managing these kids when I was a medical student is the same way we're dealing with them now, with a few minor improvements here and there. The challenge is that these kids, even when they're on medication, they still tend to suffer and die. And we have many in our foundation who have come and they've been on the regular medication and they're still having the crisis. They're still having to be admitted in the hospital. So we said, well, let's take a close look at this thing. And if you know what we've been doing before, we were just managing children with brain disorders. That was our whole focus. Sickle cell disease was not in our radar at all. We're dealing with cerebral palsy, we're dealing with meningitis, we're dealing with just brain disorders. But what started happening was that we started having patients coming to us who had had strokes. So that's a brain disorder. I mean, strokes at the age of 4 years of age, 9 years, 10 years, strokes. Imagine that. And of course, this were happening because of sickle cell disease. So we started to look at sickle cell disease and say, well, what is going on here? What can we do based on our knowledge of how the brain works, how the mind works, how the body works? What are the weaknesses that we can address? What can we fix? So it's like going further back upstream to build up the body so the body doesn't have crisis. And that was our goal. Let's try and reduce the crises by as much as 90%. And we've had about 50 or so far, and we've been making some good progress where that's concerned. So it's been very, very encouraging and very rewarding, not just for the patients, but for us as well, because it's really good to see when your interventions pay off. So let's talk about sickle cell disease. The key thing with sickle cell disease, as many of you may know, it's a blood disorder. It's a genetic blood disorder, which means that you inherit it from your parents. The key thing is that the blood cells, the normal blood cell, as opposed to a sickled blood cell, lasts for about 120 days. A sickled blood cell lasts only 20 days. It is not it is less, it is not as pliable, it is not as flexible. From the pictures you will see this. It tends under periods of stress, maybe there's not enough oxygen or maybe there's emotional stress, it tends to form a sickled shape easily. And once it forms a sickled shape, it becomes harder and harder to move through the blood vessels, especially the smaller blood vessels. And once that happens, there's the likelihood it can block the blood vessels. And once blockage happens, you get what? You get pain. So the key, let me just try and go over again. The key problem is that the blood cells tend to be more fragile. They tend to be more prone to forming sickle-shaped cells. These sickle-shaped cells can block their blood vessels. That's why children have bone pains, stomach pains, chest pains. They call them syndromes. And those can be very, very distressing, like we discussed. The other thing that those cells can do is that they can rupture. Again, I mentioned that they are fragile. They last only about 20 days as opposed to 120 days in the normal cells. So those cells can just rupture spontaneously, especially under stress. And once that happens, the child's blood levels go down and you see fatigue, you see in some cases stroke, in some cases the child just can't do anything again, he faints. So those are two things that can happen once a blood cell becomes a sickled blood cell. It can either rupture or it can block your blood vessels. Neither of them is good. So our goal was to say, okay, what can we do? What are the circumstances and the situations that make these cells rupture or make these cells form that sickled shape in the first place? What can we do to prevent them? And what we saw was that there are four main areas that we can address that can help to minimize the formation of these sickled shaped cells and cause crisis. One of them we found out is that children with sickle cell disease tend to have high levels of infection. And without going too scientific, their immunity, children and adults, their immunity is lower than the average person's immunity. So that makes them more prone. Number two, they tend to be more inflamed, and that's a term. Inflammation is a term that you may have heard of before, but inflammation here, we're talking about inflammation within the blood vessels. Once these cells rupture, once these cells cause damage to the lining of the blood vessels, the body responds. If you've watched any of our series on cardiovascular disease, you know how important it is that the blood vessels be clean and healthy. But in children with sickle cell disease, in adults with sickle cell disease, those blood vessels are damaged continually because of this problem. So inflammation is another thing. The third thing is free radical damage. Have you ever heard of oxidation or oxidative stress? I'm guessing maybe not. But think of your body as a machine, as a car. A car, you put in fuel, the car burns the fuel, it produces what? Waste products as well as energy. The waste products have to be gotten out. And how do they go out? Through the exhaust pipe. So the car produces energy and waste products and soot and smoke and all that goes out through the exhaust pipe. In the same way, our bodies burn fuel, meat, rice, beans. They burn them and produce energy to make our bodies work. Our bodies also produce waste products. These waste products have to be neutralized and taken out of the body. What these waste products, for the most part, are called free radicals. And our bodies has to produce anti-free radicals or antioxidants, which help to neutralize and remove these toxic products. What happens when children with sickle cell disease, in addition to the fact that they are burning fuel and producing waste products, is that in addition, the sickled cells produce, especially those that rupture, produce high levels of free radicals, which basically overwhelm the body's natural ability to neutralize. And so we have a problem. These children tend to have high levels of free radical damage. The third one, or the fourth and final one, is that blood flow. Blood flow is impaired, and you can see that's pretty obvious. The blood flow, because of the sickled cells that block the blood vessels, the blood flow is impaired, and all kinds of there's a cascade of reactions. So our thought was, can we produce nutrients? What can we use to repair, that we can give these kids that will repair the blood vessels so the blood can flow freely and smoothly throughout the body and not get blocked or not get hampered or impeded. So again, those are the four horsemen. Infections or immunity, 2, inflammation, 3, free radical damage, and number 4, blood flow. And so we decided to address these things, and we began to see some tremendous improvements. And we'll talk about some of them in the future. Thank you.
I thought you were actually running everything together.